Welcome, everybody, to Slammed, a podcast brought to you by Odyssey 2400 Sports, WEEI. We cover everything Boston Celtics. I'm Meghan Ottolini of Odyssey and WEEI, joined as always by Justin Turpin of the same. And we are coming off a very late night for the Boston Celtics. Unfortunately, a bad loss, 117-96 at the hands of the Lakers. There's a lot to unpack here. And I know that at this point, the Celtics are a huge topic of conversation about how concerned fans should be when they're watching a team try to run it back, try to defend a title, and having such an incredibly uneven stretch from really mid-December to where they are now towards the end of January. So I'm just going to start off, Terp. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is your concern level? 10 being absolutely panicked, out of your mind with concern.
Probably about a 5. I mean, not like they're the reigning champions, so there is some sort of leeway there, but eventually that runs out. And if you're looking at it, the inconsistency is a problem. It just over their since that Memphis game, they're 12-10. Their last 20 games, they're 10-10. They're 7-5 in January and 5-5 in their last 10 games. They're a 500 basketball team right now. And I understand they still have the third best record, but a lot of that's still just because they started off 19-4. I mean, there's almost a larger sample size now of them being a 500 basketball team as there is them being this dominant 19-4 team. So I don't think you can just brush it away. And they do, again, they earn the benefit of the doubt, but just expecting them to turn it up come the playoffs is a dangerous gamble. We've seen teams do this before where there are warning signs along the way, and they never really figure it out. You just expect come the postseason, things are going to change. That's a really dangerous gamble. So I would say about a 5. I still think they can turn this around, but the deeper and deeper we get into this run, the more it becomes an identity rather than just a sputter and a blip on the radar.
Right. I've been describing it as a slump. It's an obvious slump, but you have to wonder how long the slump is going to take before they get out of it and what it's going to take to get them out of this, because they put on some good performances. Like, I would say the win that they had over the Magic last Friday, like, that's a good Celtics win. The win that you have over a shorthanded Clippers team feels like you just get out by the skin of your teeth and you don't come out of that game feeling great about your identity and who you are. And then, of course, at the hands of the Lakers, there was a lot of factors of this particular matchup that I just thought were really weird, Turp. Like, we know that Joe Mazzulla doesn't love the double big lineup. I found it kind of curious going against a Lakers team with LeBron, with Anthony Davis, that you wouldn't lean into more of an athletic approach. And then they really kind of outgunned you from the jump. I mean, you've been having these slow starts, but having Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford out there as the double bigs for so much of it, it felt like, and I want to hear your opinion here, but it felt like Mazzulla had this idea of matching size and strength with the Lakers, and they kind of just let the Lakers win against them in a Celtics style, I thought. And there wasn't a lot of adjustments that seemed to work in real time.
Yeah, and for the slow start, like, you can point to the 5th game in 7 nights, and you can point to the 5 minutes of useless overtime that shouldn't even happen the night before against the Clippers, but they're just doing it to themselves. And there's always going to be an excuse for every game. So as much as I understand the 5th game in 7 nights, like, this is against the Lakers on a national stage. This is a team that you always get up for. It's the best rivalry in sports, and that still couldn't get them going. But as for the double big, I look at it as like, who does Joe Mazzulla trust on this roster? Like, clearly there's not another wing he trusts. Like, when the top 9 is healthy, it's the usual top 8 and Luke Cornett. That's what it's been. He clearly doesn't trust Jordan Walsh enough to give him big-time minutes. Baylor Shireman's been in the G League most of the year. We've seen Drew Peterson at times, but obviously he's a two-way. Like, there's no other wing on this roster that it seems Joe Mazzulla trusts to put in that situation. So when you're talking about that, and granted they are very restricted as to what they can do, that's where my mind goes at the trade deadline. You need to go out and get somebody. Last year, they were looking for a big wing, and they got it in Xavier Tillman, someone who's just fallen out of the rotation. Even in garbage time, they can't let my man get some run.
It's so sad for you.
It's awful. That was my guy. But just looking at that, it's like, I just wonder who Joe Mazzulla trusts on this roster right now. I mean, he's shown that he's willing to experiment and willing to get out of his comfort zone. And I think that's actually contributed to the slump a little bit because he's been experimental with the lineups and the rotations he's using. But it's just now that they're in this run, he really wants them to work through it and the guys that are going to be doing it during the postseason. That's why he's kind of keeping these rotations a little shorter, with the exception of against the Clippers when they brought in Jaden Springer and Baylor Shireman and Jordan Walsh. And obviously they were down 3 starters for that, or 3 of the top 6. So I really wonder is like, who does he trust to go in there and make a play now? Because last year was kind of O'Shea Brissett, but he hasn't shown that same trust in Jordan Walsh. And that was a big conversation. Like, we knew they were retaining essentially the same roster. But O'Shea Brissett played a big role, though limited. It was an important role, and they just haven't found that. So I think that's a problem you have to address at the deadline because, like you said, I mean, Joe doesn't like the double bigs as much. Remember his first year? It was like pulling teeth trying to get him to go to the double big lineup.
That's why it was so surprising to me, and I think it's interesting your perspective that this is about trust and the veteran presence on the court and where you're going to find your depth and the wing depth. I found it odd because I don't usually think of his approach as being that way. I think of it as being, and maybe this is just off the mark with him, but I think of it much more from a basketball perspective of who are they putting out on the court and where are they trying to exploit your weaknesses. And I thought that they looked I really think that this entire LA stretch that they had against the Clippers and the Lakers, they honestly looked out prepared. And I don't want to say out coached because I don't think that's fair. I think you're in a position as the defending champs where when you run it back with a team like this, it's amazing to bring back everyone from a championship team, but people couldn't know you better. And so you see the Clippers and now the Lakers, teams who haven't seen you this season, and the Lakers being able to exploit your weaknesses because they've got so much knowledge on you. And there does feel like there's a little bit of an imbalance with some of these teams.
And I think that's playing into the reigning champs getting everyone's best shot. I mean, that's totally a true thing. We see it in every sport. The reigning champs always get the opposing team's best shot. And oftentimes opponents punch above their weight. But this is also, like you said, the same exact team from last year. And as they're trying to make these different adjustments, they tried it with the sub pattern. It kind of backfired. Now they're going back to the old one. It's looked a little bit better, save for last night. But you're right. They have all this film on them. There was no real changes to the philosophy. They're just kind of sticking with what they did. And they should. It won them 64 games in an NBA title. Like, they should stick with that. It clearly works. But we're seeing that. And I keep going back to this quote from Joe in training camp, where he's like, there's intangibles that we need to do, but there's also things that we have to kind of recreate. And it feels like they just haven't done those intangibles, like that mindset. Like, they were wearing sweatshirts that said mindset across the front. Like, that was their rallying cry. It was their version of Mbutu. And now it's like, where is that? Like, they're skipping steps and all this stuff that we didn't see last year. And I get they're the reigning champs, but at some point there has to be some sort of urgency to get back to that level.
I think urgency is a big part of it. I wrote something for EEI earlier this week examining the repeat champions and what their second regular seasons look like in those repeat years. Of course, the big one is Golden State in 2018, going back to the Heat in 2013, and the Lakers before that, 2009 to 2010. And with the Lakers and Golden State, they had significantly worse records and were significantly less efficient, especially on offense in the second season, and they still went back to back. And in Golden State's case, they were able to sweep the Cavs in that final. So part of me does look at it and looking at the point just past midseason where these teams are, everybody's in line. Like, with all these teams, they kind of fall around the same record. They have the same kind of approach and they're seeing the same challenges. So I don't think this is a unique thing to the Celtics. It's just tough when there's not any one particular thing that you can point to and say, well, this is so clearly what the difference is from last year. They're lucky. There's not an injury. There's not a coaching change. There's not a player who got sent out of town. There's not a player who was brought in that they're trying to adjust to. It does feel like you said, a bunch of little intangibles. And that brings us to this conversation that our friends who do talk radio every day love to have, which is what's going on in the locker room, what's going on with the personalities, what's going on with the chemistry of the team. And I think a lot of people think this team is suspect over the last really 5 weeks because you have Jaylen Brown not doing as many post-game press conferences and media availabilities. And because they're the champs, everything that they're saying is being parsed and taken apart word by word to say, like, what does this indicate about what's wrong with this team? Do you think that there's anything to any of that, Turp?
I don't think there's anything particularly in the locker room. I think it is just a bad stretch. And this team always, especially Jaylen Brown, wore losses difficult. He always wore them on his sleeve. He was always tough after losses. So I think that paired with his individual play is turning into frustration for him. Also, he's kind of annoyed, and I know they're kind of rectifying this problem now. I think he's annoyed about the whole sub pattern thing. Like he feels like that's playing into his poor play, specifically offensively. And it's easy to get disengaged when you feel like you're not having your best shot to succeed. So I do think that plays into it in Jaylen's sense, but I also think like people are frustrated across the board. Everyone is slumping. Like Derek White, this might be the worst stretch we've seen in his career. And I don't think it's a surprise or a coincidence that the Celtics are having their worst stretch in the last couple of years when Derek White is slumping like this. Like they go as Derek White goes. So just the shooting slumps and the individual lapses across the board, I think, are wearing on them a little bit, and they're frustrated. I don't think they're frustrated at each other. It's just individually, everybody has been struggling, and that wears on you, especially when now we're going on 7 weeks of this inconsistent play. Like that's frustrating for a team that holds themselves to such a high standard, and they feel the weight of these expectations. It's not like they don't understand that people expect them to win 60 games, get back to the finals, and they probably did think it was going to be a little bit easy. They probably did. That's human nature. And Brad Stevens talked about it in the summer, right? Like right before the draft, like that was going to be something they battled. And as much as they wanted that target on their back, I mean, you can't replicate that. So part of it, I think, is they didn't expect this. And maybe they were kind of naive to not, but I also think the frustrations individually play into that.
I'm glad you say that because I do feel, like when I'm on the radio this past week, I feel like I'm getting told that I'm being almost borderline naive or I'm whistling past the graveyard. And I don't feel that way. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Celtics are playing great basketball right now because they're not. Anybody who watches the games night in and night out can see that. But I do think that with the way that everybody looks at the Jaylen Brown stuff because of a comment that he makes to Abby Chin from NBC Sports Boston on the sideline, like, I didn't even take that comment as he was saying, like, oh, he hates the role that he's in and that he doesn't want to be a playmaker. He wants to be the guy with the ball in his hands at the end of the play. Like, I think it was just him trying to search to give some kind of reason for why his play is not working right now. Like not an excuse,
Right.
but trying to explain himself a little bit of like, well, we're adjusting through different things and trying to figure stuff out. And my role changes in that. And people hear that and they go, he doesn't like his role. Like he's mad at Tatum. And I don't know. I also feel, I'll just say really quickly that Jaylen throughout his career, especially the last 4-5 years, he says what's on his mind. And like he is 10 toes down just about what he's feeling in the moment. And he doesn't apologize and he doesn't shy away from that. And we've seen him direct that message at times towards whether the approach should be more offense, more defensive identity team. We've seen him direct it towards the Olympics and shoe companies. And so I don't necessarily think this is about something that's happening with this Celtics team right now. I think as Jaylen gets more power with the contract that he's earned and being his status as being Eastern Conference and Finals champ and being on this team, that he's just confident in speaking his feelings. And that's what it is.
And he's earned that right. And I also say, and we're in the press conferences, this team is so buttoned up. Like they don't give you much. Like they are just, when it comes to the media and their PR training, it's incredible. Like they will not really say much. They stick with it and they're just always going to say the right things. There's nothing that you can ever like take and dissect with them because they're just such basic answers. Like they're robots in that sense. And it's a good thing to have. So when a guy like Jaylen says something like that, of course people are going to read into it because otherwise, they don't really give you much. It's pretty much the same generic coach talk that you would hear from a guy like Mazzulla. Like, there's nothing really there.
Well, Mazzulla gives you a lot weirder stuff.
Yeah, he does give you a lot of unique stuff. But he's another one. Like, he goes leaps and bounds not to criticize his team in front of the media. That doesn't mean he's not doing it behind closed doors, which I'm sure he is. Like, this guy, all he cares about is winning. And for them to have a 12-10 stretch over the last 7 weeks, I'm sure there's been a lot of heartfelt conversations in the locker room, whatever it may be. But because of just how buttoned up they are, I think when Jalen speaks out like that a little bit, it's like, oh, is something wrong here? But people also lose sight that that's just Jalen, and he's earned the right to express his feelings, and he's always done that. So it's really nothing different. It's just that we're not used to it because you just went over a calendar year of just pure dominance, and now you're finally hitting a stretch, and everyone's kind of reverting back to the old Celtics. Oh, is there a problem in the locker room and all that? I just don't understand why it always goes back to that. Like, we just did this for the last 8 years. Oh, can they play together? Is there a problem in the locker room? All this, like, now they're having a stretch and we just revert back to that. Like, let's think of something more creative.
Well, so my feeling is Jalen has expressed his displeasure or dissatisfaction at different points before. He gave an entire interview to the New York Times about how much he had to sacrifice and understanding his role on the team when Tatum, a superstar, is also on the team. That was years ago. And they still won the championship and they still flourished. So I don't think that this is anything new. I think that he's somebody with a lot of passion for the game who cares a lot and speaks his mind. And that is not something new. So,
and he's prideful.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to talk to you about something a little bit more basketball centric before we go, though, which is I know you love stats.
I do.
And you're a big numbers guy. And so this morning I've been thinking about what's different with the defense between Drew Holiday and Derek White this season compared to last season when they had just such a formidable defensive backcourt. And I was combing through some of the stats, and I think it's kind of unfair to Drew Holiday because he is playing a lot better over the last couple of weeks. He's getting back to himself, and his production and everything reflects that, even though he had some really inexplicable decisions a couple games ago in regulation. But all to say, I think I might have been looking at the wrong guy. And I'm looking at Jalen. And Jalen's defense is different. And I feel concerned about this. And I don't want to sound an alarm, but I just want to read you a couple of defensive plus minuses from this season compared to last season and get your read on it. Because I know this isn't a perfect stat. It's all about who else is on the court with you, what points in the games you are. But it's kind of jarring when you see Derek White has a 1.4 defensive box score plus minus. So anytime that you're in a positive place with the defensive plus minus, it means you're making a really strong impact on defense. The higher that is, the much stronger defender you are. So last year, super strong defender for Derek White. That's down to 0.4 this season. And we've seen Derek White have some really strong defensive plays, but that's a big drop. For Jaylen Brown, last year he was a minus 0.1. So basically average. He's a league average defender, and for his usage rate and everything that he does on both sides, you kind of expect that. But it's down to a minus 0.7. And I just find that a much bigger fluctuation than we've seen from him in a while. And that to me can't just be indicative going back to the Toronto New Year's Eve game where he's hurt and then he's out a couple of games. So I'm wondering what you think about that, because at this rate, Jalen's defense statistically, just by that one number, is actually worse than Peyton Pritchard's impact when he's out there. And Peyton Pritchard makes a much stronger offensive impact on the box score than either of those guys for the overall time that he's out there.
Yeah, we just mentioned Jalen's pride, and a lot of that starts on the defensive end. And it just feels like there hasn't been the same focus and energy that he brought last year. He's been on record saying that he likes to set the tone defensively. He likes to be the head of the snake.
And he likes really putting his running shoes on.
Yeah, he likes to defend the whole court. And he showed he could do it. The problem is with him, as it's been the problem with everybody on the team, is doing it consistently. So when he has these clunkers, I kept thinking back to the Toronto game when they lost in Toronto. If you just go back and watch some of his closeouts and the effort he was giving defensively, you'd be like, there's no way this guy got all defensive team votes last year. There's no way. But he was that good defensively, and he can be. I think he is one of the best two-way players in the league when he wants to be. And I think that does go back to the disconnect a little bit about his frustration, where he's just like, you get in his own head a little bit, and he's earned it. Like, he's earned everything that he has. It's just he needs to really get back to what the Celtics need. And obviously, it's been a difficult kind of stretch for him here. Obviously, what happened with his mother, I don't know if that's factoring in. And if it is, it's totally understandable, like 100%. Because
Definitely.
you feel like there has been a drop-off since then. But they need him to really pride himself and get back to that, because he starts it defensively for the Celtics, and we just haven't seen that same energy this year.
Okay. Well, I'm saying they need to adjust something defensively. Derek White, I always just say, I think gets into these crises of confidence, as I call it. He's just the nicest guy in the world who still thinks that he's a junior college basketball player. And
I
it's
do
like,
love
dude.
how poorly he's shooting. He's just letting him fly. Like, he's just so confident. I love it.
All right. Well, that is our episode of Slammed. We haven't gotten so much on the sale bidding process. I'm sure we'll attack that a little bit more next week, and hoping to bring on some guests for you guys soon. So stay tuned. Celtics will be back against Houston Monday night. I'll be there. Turp, you're there?
I'll be there.
All right. We'll see you there. We'll have an episode after that game, most likely. If you enjoyed this episode of Slam, please like, subscribe, comment, give us a review, whatever. And find us on all your social media channels. We're on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks, guys.